You'll of course all be aware of the terrible events of last week. I spoke to you at about this time on Friday. Since that time, Defence have announced the 5 Australian soldiers who were so terribly killed in action in Afghanistan. Let me just take this, my first opportunity, to publicly express my condolences to the families concerned. To the family of Lance Corporal Stefan Milosevic, or Rick Milosevic as he's known to his family from Penrith, to Private Robert Pote from Canberra, and to Sapper James Martin, based in Perth, and I'll make some remarks about that in a moment. They were the 3 soldiers terribly killed in the Insider incident, or the so-called green on blue incident, and my condolences go to their friends, their families and their loved ones. The 2 Australian soldiers killed in the helicopter crash, both commandos from Holsworthy, both Special Forces personnel, Private Nathaniel Gallagher from New South Wales and Lance Corporal Mervyn McDonald, also West Australian from Carnarvon with family in Western Australia. So can I extend again my condolences to those families and to their friends, their mates and their loved ones. There will of course in Perth and Western Australia be particular interest in the terrible fatalities of Mervyn McDonald and also Sapper James Martin. Lance Corporal McDonald grew up in Carnarvon and continues to have family in Western Australia. He of course recently based at Holsworthy. Sapper James Martin grew up in Perth, and as the local federal member for Perth, I know that in his youth he played local cricket with the Maylands Cricket Club and also played local football with the Bayswater Bears Football Club. So there'll be a lot of sadness in our local community with young James Martin's death tragically at the young age of 21. Let me now deal with some of the matters arising from those terrible events last week. But let me firstly deal with issues arising from the so-called green on blue incident. As you'll be aware, last week both the Chief of the Defence Force and I indicated that following terrible like events last year, Australia had taken additional force protection measures in Afghanistan. Following the events of last week, the Chief of the Defence Force and his chain of command have instituted additional force protection measures. I'm not proposing to go into those details other than to say that additional precautionary measures have been taken. I spoke with the Chief of the Defence Force earlier this morning and he advises me that from today, from Monday morning, Afghanistan time in Afghan province, Australian personnel will be conducting the tasks and the operations which had previously been set for them this week. So their work continues, but with those additional force protection measures. Let me just draw some attention to a number of ISAF decisions that have been made over the weekend and announced, decisions by the International Security Assistance Force, and there's been some reporting of these matters. Some has been accurate, some has been inaccurate. I don't say that critically, but let me just place on the record the decisions and the announcement which ISAF have made. Of course, these have Australian officials, both in Afghanistan and Australia, have been made aware of these decisions. So I'll outline the decisions and then reflect upon any implications for Australia. Firstly, the International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, has announced that Afghan local police recruits, new recruits, will no longer be trained pending additional vetting or re-vetting procedures of those Afghan local police recruits. That involves about 1,000 new Afghan local police recruits. Australia does not train Afghan local police at all, and so this has no impact on Australian operations in Afghan province or Afghanistan generally. But that decision has been announced by ISAF over the weekend. ISAF has also made it clear over the weekend that partnered operations between International Security Assistance Force and the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police will continue. So there have been no changes to those partnered operations. They will continue. They are not affected. And so International Security Assistance Force partnered operations, including partnered operations with Australian Defence Force personnel, with Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police continue. Contrary to some reports, Special Forces operations will continue. That has been made clear by the leadership of ISAF over the weekend. So Special Forces operations, partnered Special Forces operations, will continue. What is occurring on that front is that ISAF, in conjunction with the Afghan National Security Forces, are checking the vetting status of Afghan Special Forces personnel and Afghan commandos. But operations have not been suspended. So there will be some checking of the vetting status of Afghan Special Forces and commando personnel, but there have been no suspension of those partnered operations. So at this stage there is no impact on Australian operations, and those operations continued. As I indicated earlier, the task which had previously been set for Australian forces in Oresgon for this week will continue. The additional task, of course, in addition to those tasks previously set, is the partnered operation with Afghan National Security Forces seeking to locate and find and capture Hekmatullah, the alleged perpetrator of the atrocity last week. So there's no disturbing of the Australian operations as I've outlined. Let me now deal with a statement released by the palace in Kabul over the weekend with respect to a particular partnered Australian Afghan National Security Force operation. The operation in question was a fully partnered operation with Afghan forces, and it had as part of its objective to seek to locate Hekmatullah or to locate insurgents who were suspected of assisting his escape. That fully partnered operation, which was conducted over the weekend, involved some 60 Australian Defence Force personnel and over 80 Afghan National Army personnel. Contrary to suggestions from Afghanistan, that partnered operation was authorised in accordance with the usual and normal procedures. It was authorised in accordance with the usual procedures conducted with the Oresgon Chief of Police and the Governor of Oresgon Province. So the usual processes were followed, and that partnered or joint operation was fully authorised in accordance with the usual arrangements. I'm advised by the Chief of the Defence Force that the outcome of that operation were that 2 people who have been confirmed as insurgents were killed. Any loss of life is of course regrettable, but I'm advised by the Chief of the Defence Force that the 2 people who were killed have been confirmed as insurgents, both by Australian sources and by Afghan sources. 12 people were detained as a result of that operation. Of the 12 detained, 1 was a woman, the first such occasion, according to our records, where a woman was detained. Subsequent to the detention of those 12, 11 were subsequently released, and they were released to the satisfaction of Australian personnel who believed that there was no evidence warranting their ongoing or continued detention. The 11 who were released included the woman concerned. The one who was detained, who continues to be detained, is regarded as an insurgent leader in Afghanistan, in Oresgon Province, and Australian Defence Force personnel in Oresgon are proceeding on the basis that there is evidence that he sought to assist or did assist Hekmatullah in his escape from Afghan National Security Forces and Australian forces who were pursuing him. ISAF have verified overnight that ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force, also believes in that analysis and accords with those facts. There are suggestions of ill treatment of those people who are detained. That is not my advice, and I have very strong advice to the contrary from the Chief of the Defence Force. Finally, The statement which has been issued by President Karzai's palace over the weekend in Kabul, that this operation was not authorised, is wrong. That is not factually correct, and this point has been made strongly by Australia's ambassador to Afghanistan, to palace and presidential officials, including the National Security Advisor, Mr. Spanter. So the operation in question was fully authorised, was fully partnered, and the outcome of the operation has been the detention of an individual who is regarded not just as a leader of the insurgency in Afghan province, but a person who has also sought to or actually assisted Hekmatullah in his escape. And our ambassador in Kabul has made clear to the palace our disappointment at the statement issued from the palace over the weekend.